Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is another video on React. So this will be sort of the final one in sort of my new intro series. There are other topics that you should learn, like how to use the use reducer hook, the use context hook. There are already videos on that in my React playlist, so go check those out. But this is kind of like a nice reintroduction, these first 5 videos in the playlist. But this one's going to be just basically about making the actual API call. So I've kind of mentioned this in the past, that if you wanted to make an API call, where would you do it? In your lifecycle function. So let's actually do it. So first, let's actually kickstart our React application. So let me start my server. Light server. Let that start up. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to go to JSON placeholder, which just gives you like dummy API data to play with. So we're going to let that load. Okay. And as you can see, like, we're piling up all these components. So like, here's our app component. And over the last several videos, we've created different components, and so we're just plopping them in there. So this doesn't become this like huge thing. Each thing is kind of bite-sized. Okay. As far as the actual like HTML or JSX, that's there. And then you have all this other logic for each component. Some components do get pretty complicated. But let's see here. Cool. Okay, so this is going to be the code we want, but I want to use something else. Let's see, list all resources. Yeah, here we go. I want this. So basically what happens is that you might have used like jQuery and used their Ajax function. You might have used Angular and used their HTTP function. You might have used Axios to do your API calls. But the browser actually has a natively built-in way of making API calls. It's called fetch. It's built in. So if I wanted to do an API call, I could just do it from, again, I would do it in componented mount. I would just use the fetch function. And basically, if you've used those other ones, then you kind of know this already. But the way this works is that fetch says, hey, I'm going to go grab this URL. So you pass the URL as a string. It's going to go, by default, it makes a GET request to that string. Now, if you wanted to change that, like I want to make that a post or something like that, you'd pass that an object as a second argument, like that says like method, post, method, put, whatever, and has all those details in there. For that, I would refer to the JavaScript documentation so you know which properties you can put in there. But that's what you would do. So this fetches this, and what it returns is a promise. And again, the way promises work is that promises generally have 3 states. So this returns a promise in the state, and basically what happens is that that promise will either be pending, which means it's still waiting for a response. It will resolve, which means it gave you back stuff that you can work with, or it'll be in an error state. So one of those 3 things are going to happen. But the thing is that you really don't want to play with the data until you actually got it back. So the way promises work is that you can chain this .then function off them. The .then function doesn't trigger until either there's a resolution or an error. Okay, and inside of it you can pass 2 callbacks. So in this here we only passed 1. So essentially the first callback, the first function you put in here, happens when this resolves. When the promise that it's changed to resolves. So it's going to wait for the promise that comes back from this fetch function and waits for it to resolve, and then this .then gets triggered, which returns another promise, and then it's going to wait for that promise to resolve, and then this .then will then, when that promise resolves, chain off that. But if, let's say I wanted to be, in case there was an error, I could put a second function in here and be like error console.log error. So that way if something goes wrong, the second function runs. If things go well, the first function runs. Okay? So essentially what this does is that the fetch basically gets back a string as its data. Okay, it doesn't automatically like turn it into a JSON object or a JavaScript object. So you have to take that response string and then do response.json, which takes that string and turns it into a JavaScript object. That gets returned, and that's what the next promise resolves. Now you have the actual object with the data, and now you can do whatever you want in this third .then. Okay, so So basically this should work. I mean, I don't have to change it at all. And when we go back over here, we should be able to see it in the console. So Shift I. Okay, and then we see this array that we got back. That's the result of the promise. Cool. Now let's say I put an extra, like, let's say I put post, so that's going to be the wrong URL. So I should get back an error. So let's see what happens. Yeah, then I didn't get back an error. Probably just, let's see here. How can I force an error to happen? I'd have to probably create my own API and cause it the error, but the idea is if there was an error, this other function would resolve. Cool. So how would I do that in my function component? Again, you put it in your lifecycle function. So where I would put it is if I were to go back over here to my function component counter, we would create a react.use effect. And then here we pass a callback. And I would just do it in here. Now here's a problem. If I just leave it like this, watch what happens. Well, right now nothing it wouldn't be a problem. But let's say I wanted to assign this data to my state. So basically, let's change the second callback. Okay, we're going to console.log JSON. And then I'm going to want to set my state to JSON. So set state. Well, set state the existing state, and then we're gonna have a property called JSON, which is gonna equal, it'll just equal JSON. So in that case, I don't have to put a separate thing there. Okay. So if I do that, now watch what's gonna happen in the console. Okay. And see, so that's doing it over and over and over again. Okay, so the reason why that happens is that the way use effect works is that anytime it's going to end up running every time it re-renders because I didn't specify any dependencies. So that's why I have to add this extra empty array, because now I'm saying only when these things change do I want you to run this use effect again, this function. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Now when this refreshes, it'll only run once because none of the dependencies, there is no dependencies, haven't updated. Okay. Still running a bunch of times. So that means that's something we didn't change, right? Let's see here. Then set state. Shouldn't be rerunning anymore, but it is. Let's just take a look at my syntax. Console.log, set state. Let's actually put something in there then. We'll just say state. It's supposed to be just an empty array. Okay, I just noticed the problem. See this little array here that I passed? I passed it in the wrong place. I need to pass it here. There we go. I was passing it in the .then, not in the actual fetch. So now we should only run once. And yep, there we go. So see there, that stops it. So this, when you're using use effect, you just got passed in that array. If I did want it to update, so let's say I wanted to update specifically like when this .count changes, or when state.count changes, I could do this. State.count. And this should only update when state.count changes. So let's see here. Let's wait for it. Okay, so right now, see, it hasn't updated. Didn't rerun it. But if I do this, it runs it again. Okay, because it's a dependency. So that's how that works again. Okay, so that's it. That's all there is. See, I've set the state to, and I've added this to the state. So now JSON is part of the state. Cool. And then I can re-render it. So let's say here, let's re-render it over here. Actually, let's just do it as part of the more stuff. Okay, and we'll just do state.json. Let's actually take a look at the data. State.json, the first element, and we'll use the title property. So that would be state.json 0.title. Okay. So now it has the data. So it fetched it. So it's part of the state. Now if I keep hitting this, and it breaks. Now read property 0 of undefined. What did I call it? State.json.title. Let's do this. Let's take this out for a moment. Actually, let's just add a console log here. Let's console log state after the fetch. So this way we can see what the state looks like. Okay, interesting. We did not add JSON to the state. Let's examine why. State.setState state JSON equals JSON should. Oh, but I see why. Because when you do the state.count, that's just setting it to count. So what I need to do here is do .state. So see, that's just replacing the state with only count. Because again, whenever you run set state, it replaces the state with what you pass in. So I want to make sure that I don't get rid of the other stuff in state. I got to do a .state there. This is why. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere else I'm using set state. Okie dokie. Still says that, but it's because setting the state's asynchronous. So now, let's see here. And there it goes. See, it works. So now it took the title from the API data and interpolated it in there. So this little piece of code is now working. Okay, so again, these are the kind of issues you got to think through, and again, that's why I like to kind of work through these issues on video, so that way, when you run into them, you've seen an example of working through them. Not just me solving it, but just also the process of me solving it. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is how to use async await. Okay, now, first let's do it in our component did mount. It's the same thing both. You can't just use, like, the way async await works is you have to run it in a function. So what we have to do is actually create a function in component did mount. So we'll just say const API call equals, and then we'll make it an async function. So it's got to be like that. And then what we do, the way it works, it just, all you're doing is just changing the syntax. That's all this is. So you could literally just not do this. What you do is we're going to do const response. So what you do is you define the variable that will store the results when the promise resolves. And when you use the await keyword, it's basically saying when the promise from this function resolves, we're going to store the data in response. It's essentially the same thing we did before. It's just this looks nicer. Okay? And then we're going to want to take that response, and we're going to do something else with it and store it in JSON. Okay, so that's going to be await response.json. Response.json, so we can get rid of this. And then after that, I can do whatever I want with it. So then I can console log JSON. And I'll see I don't have to do all these .thens. It just looks a little bit cleaner. The only catch is that I can't do like a second callback for like an error because there's no callbacks. So if I really want to catch errors, I have to use a try catch block. So I'd have to be like try. Okay, which means do this code, try the code that's in the try block. Now, if there's an error, we'll catch it, and we'll call that an error, and we'll just console.log our error. Okay, so that way if there is, by chance, any errors anywhere in this code, we'll catch it and console log it so we can figure it out what it is. Because a lot of times you'll get errors, and it won't tell you anything, because you didn't catch it. So try catch blocks can be your friend. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, I think we got some stuff we gotta fix. Say, caught syntax error. It's complaining about something down there, but why would it complain about, hey, I'm here? Oh, it's because we deleted that code there. Okay, we have that hanging curly bracket. Okay, cool. Oh, I see what I did wrong. Okay, so we only have one console log. The reason is, if we go back up here, I defined this function called API call, but I never call it. So what you have to do is, again, to use async await, you have to define the function, because we need to use this async keyword, which goes with the function definition. But then I have to actually go back and call the function. API call. Which is the same thing as what I did before. Again, you could use fetch, and that worked fine too. And see there, you get the two API calls. And literally would be the same thing that I would do here in use state. So if I'm doing this as a function component, I would just do the same thing here. I would just replace this with that. So first I have to define a function that's async, do all my code in there, and then call the function. And then you can use async await inside your lifecycle functions, do all your synchronous stuff there, and yay! Okay, and that's just for getting. Like if you need to do like, you know, a post or a put request, you could just put this anywhere. It could be the function that runs when your button clicks. The only difference is that you would then, again, in your fetch, run a second, you know, you would pass in this object, and this object would have things like method, and here you would put like post, and then you would add like body, which then you would put whatever variable. So here you'd put like your body variable, then you'd have the string. Well, you'd be like doing JSON dot stringify body, and then if you have any headers, you put that there. You get the point. Okay, and then that's it. That's how you do that. This is essentially really not so much a lesson in React, more than a lesson in the fetch function. But there are some nuances about, you know, using that in your lifecycle functions. Okay, so we kind of did a nice review of lifecycle functions, a review of the fetch function. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. But at this point, you should be pretty good at doing 90% of things with React. The only other thing that I highly recommend learning would be the use context hook and the use reducer hook, which I do have videos on. Just check out the playlist. And then it's just a matter of like learning different ways to style, which you could just use a CSS file or do global styling. You could do inline styling. Okay, so essentially what you could do is, if I wanted to style this H1 here, I can just do this style and equals, and I'm pretty sure I'm passing this as an object, so it would be like color orange, and then that would do that. So let me just double check. Okay, nope, doesn't like it. Unexpected token. Let's just do a quick Google search. inline styles in React. Because usually what I do is like, I'll either use a CSS file or I'll use what's called styled components, which is a library you can download. It allows you to create like styling components. But if you just really want to make sure that your styling is purely in your component, oh, it's two curly brackets because you have to put it in an object. That's why. So let's pass that in. There you go, because you're passing in an object into that thing. And then in that object is a CSS property as the key, and the value as the value. So let's do it. Okay, that looks to be running. So then we click this a bunch of times. And look, it's orange. So that's how you do your styling in React, as inline styles. So that way your components are encapsulated. You could also do it in a CSS file. If you're using Webpack, then you can bundle it and have CSS files for each individual component. And then there are other like styling libraries. Although, you could and then if you're using a bundler, then you can also use like Sass or something. So there's just options. But that's sort of would be the next thing to learn. Otherwise, I think you guys got a pretty good smattering of React. I'll see you guys later on. Have a great